Story 1. The Way Station That Weighed Souls. Gabriel Torres had been driving commercially for 21 years, hauling everything from electronics to perishable goods across the American Southwest. He knew every truck stop, every way station, every stretch of problematic road between Los Angeles and Dallas. On October 31, 2017, Halloween night, Gabriel encountered a way station that would fundamentally alter his understanding of reality and the nature of the work he'd been doing for over 2 decades. Gabriel was eastbound on Interstate 10, crossing through the desolate stretch of western Arizona between Quartzsite and Phoenix. It was 11:43 p.m. and he was hauling a refrigerated load of produce that needed to reach a distribution center in Tucson by morning. Traffic was sparse, just the occasional passenger vehicle and the rare fellow trucker. The desert stretched dark and empty on both sides of the highway, illuminated only by starlight and the pale glow of a 3/4 moon. The way station appeared without warning. One moment, the highway ahead was clear. The next, bright lights and official signage indicated a mandatory way station check. Gabriel frowned. He knew this stretch of I-10 intimately, had driven it hundreds of times. There was no way station between Quartzsite and Phoenix. The nearest permanent facility was almost 60 miles east. Yet here it was, as solid and real as anything Gabriel had ever seen. Concrete approach lanes, an official-looking building, electronic signs directing commercial vehicles to enter. Gabriel's first instinct was that this was a new facility, perhaps one that had been constructed recently without his knowledge. The Arizona Department of Transportation occasionally opened new inspection sites. He signaled and began to slow, preparing to exit onto the way station ramp as required by law. As a professional driver with an impeccable safety record, Gabriel never skipped way stations. Compliance was part of his professional identity. The approach ramp led to a series of scales, the standard setup for any commercial vehicle inspection facility. But as Gabriel's truck rolled onto the scale platform, he noticed something unusual. The building ahead didn't look quite right. The architecture was too old, too dated, like something from the 1960s or earlier. Modern way stations were typically contemporary structures with large windows and visible technology. This building was squat, windowless, built from cinder blocks painted an institutional gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gabriel's truck came to a complete stop on the scale, and he waited for the signal to either proceed or pull into the inspection bay. Instead, a figure emerged from the building, a man wearing what appeared to be an official uniform, though Gabriel couldn't quite make out the specific agency or department. The uniform looked wrong somehow, like it was from a different era or perhaps a different country entirely. The man approached Gabriel's truck and gestured for him to roll down his window. Gabriel complied and immediately noticed something deeply unsettling. The man had no face, where features should have been: eyes, nose, mouth. There was only smooth, blank skin, like an unfinished sculpture or a mannequin that had never been properly detailed. Gabriel gasped and jerked backward in his seat, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. But before he could grab it, the faceless man spoke. His voice came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, seeming to bypass Gabriel's ears entirely and speak directly into his mind. Gabriel Enrique Torres, commercial driver's license number A7SFM39284, issued by the state of California. You are here for mandatory weighing. Please exit your vehicle and proceed to the inspection office. I don't understand, Gabriel stammered, his voice shaking. What is this? Who are you? I am Inspector Designate 17. This is Way Station 0, operated under special jurisdiction. Your compliance is mandatory. Please exit your vehicle. Gabriel's rational mind was screaming at him to start his truck and drive away as fast as possible. But his body seemed to be operating on autopilot, influenced by 21 years of obedience to official inspection procedures. He found himself opening his door, climbing down from the cab and walking toward the cinder block building as if compelled by something beyond his conscious will. The faceless inspector walked beside him, never quite touching but maintaining an uncomfortably close proximity. As they approached the building, Gabriel noticed other trucks parked in the facility. Dozens of them, perhaps 100 or more, all sitting silent and dark in neat rows that extended far beyond what the visible property should accommodate. The trucks were from every era of commercial transportation: ancient Peterbilts from the 1950s, Kenworths from the 1970s and 80s, modern Freightliners and Volvos. All of them abandoned, or so it appeared. No drivers were visible. No lights illuminated the cabs. They sat like a graveyard of commercial vehicles, monuments to journeys that had ended at this impossible place. The door to the building opened without the inspector touching it, revealing an interior that was far larger than the exterior suggested. Gabriel stepped inside and found himself in a vast chamber that seemed to extend upward and outward into impossible dimensions. The space was filled with scales, not vehicle scales, but something else entirely. They looked ancient, like the balance scales of classical mythology, with two plates suspended from chains. Thousands of these scales hung in the air throughout the chamber, some at floor level, others suspended high above, all of them slowly swaying as if moved by an unfelt wind. On each scale's plates were objects, or rather representations of objects. Gabriel could see miniature trucks, tiny cargo loads, small replicas of documents and manifests. But there was something else on the scales too, something that Gabriel's eyes couldn't quite focus on. Shapes that seemed to shift between visibility and invisibility. Forms that suggested human silhouettes but refused to resolve into clear images. "What is this place?" Gabriel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Inspector Designate 17 gestured toward the nearest scale. "This is where we weigh what truly matters, Mr. Torres. Your truck's physical weight was recorded at the external scale, 78,420 pounds, well within legal limits. But that is not why you are here. We measure something far more significant than metal and cargo." As Gabriel watched, the scale nearest to him began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. Images appeared on its plates. On one side, Gabriel saw his truck, his cargo of produce, his documentation and logs. On the other side, he saw something that made his breath catch. Memories. His memories. Moments from his career as a driver crystallized into visible forms. He saw the time in 2009 when he discovered a family of migrants hiding in an empty trailer he was supposed to pick up. He'd given them water, food, and called for help rather than simply reporting them to authorities. He saw the night in 2013 when he'd stopped to help another driver whose truck had broken down in a snowstorm, waiting with him for 3 hours until a tow truck arrived. He saw countless small moments, allowing a car to merge in heavy traffic, helping an elderly woman load groceries into her vehicle at a rest stop, choosing to drive tired but safe rather than push beyond his limits and risk an accident. But he also saw darker moments, times when he'd been impatient, when he'd cursed at other drivers, when he'd cut corners on inspection procedures, when he'd been rude to dock workers or dismissive to waitstaff at truck stops. He saw the time he'd kept driving despite knowing his brakes needed service, gambling that he could complete one more delivery before repairs. He saw moments of selfishness, of small cruelties, of ethical compromises he'd made in the name of efficiency or profit. All of these moments, good and bad, were being measured, weighed, evaluated. "What you're seeing," Inspector Designate 17 explained, "is the true cargo you've been carrying all these years. Not the physical freight, but the moral weight of your choices, your actions, your impacts on others. Every driver passes through this station eventually. Some come early in their careers, others drive for decades before they arrive here. but all come eventually, and here we measure what kind of driver they truly were. Gabriel felt tears streaming down his face. This is judgment. This is like the afterlife. Am I dead? Did I crash? You are not dead, Mr. Torres. You are in a space between, a place where the physical world and something deeper intersect. This station exists on every highway simultaneously, in every time period, waiting for drivers who are ready to be measured. Some who come here return to the physical world, continue their journeys, live out their careers. Others do not return. It depends on what the scales reveal. Gabriel watched as his scale continued to balance his actions, the plates slowly moving up and down as more memories were added to each side. His good deeds, his kindnesses, his moments of integrity. These accumulated on one plate. His failures, his shortcuts, his moments of callousness, these weighed down the other. What happens if the scales tip the wrong way? Gabriel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Then you join the others, the drivers whose trucks you saw outside, the ones who failed the weighing, whose moral cargo was found to be too heavy on the wrong side. They remain here in service to the station, helping to process the endless stream of drivers who arrive for judgment. They become like me, facilitators of the weighing, eternal inspectors measuring others because they themselves were found wanting. Gabriel looked more carefully at Inspector Designate 17, and with horror he realized that beneath the blank, featureless surface, there were hints of a human face trying to emerge. Features that had been erased or covered over, identity stripped away, leaving only the function of inspection and judgment. You were a driver once, Gabriel whispered. I was. 47 years ago I arrived at this station. The scales did not favor me. I had been a driver who prioritized profit over safety, who cut every corner, who treated others with contempt, who saw my job as nothing more than moving cargo from point A to point B without recognizing that every journey affects others, creates ripples, carries moral weight. I failed the weighing, and I have been here ever since, serving as an inspector, hoping that perhaps someday I will have processed enough other drivers to balance my own scales and earn release. Gabriel felt profound sadness for this faceless man who had once been a driver like himself, who had been trapped in this impossible place for nearly 5 decades. But he also felt terror for his own fate. His own scales were still moving, still balancing, still evaluating 21 years of choices and actions. Other faceless inspectors moved through the vast chamber, attending to other scales. Gabriel realized with growing horror that there must be hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all former drivers who had failed their weighings and been conscripted into eternal service at this station between worlds. How long does the weighing take? Gabriel asked. For some, moments. For others, hours or days. Time flows differently here. You may experience this weighing as a few minutes, but in the external world, hours or weeks might pass. Or no time at all. This place exists outside normal temporal flow. Gabriel watched his scales intently, trying to remember more good deeds, more moments of kindness, as if his thoughts could influence the balance. But he knew that only the truth mattered here. The actual weight of his actual choices, not his hopes or rationalizations. The memories continued to play out on the scale plates. Gabriel saw himself at age 25, just starting his career, full of enthusiasm and idealism. He saw his gradual transformation over the years, the ways that exhaustion, economic pressure, and the grinding nature of the work had worn away some of his principles. He saw moments where he'd chosen efficiency over compassion, profit over ethics, self-interest over collective good. But he also saw resilience. He saw how he'd maintained his core decency despite the pressures. He saw how he'd helped other drivers, how he'd treated dock workers with respect even when they were slow or difficult. how he'd reported safety violations even when it cost him time and money. He saw the time he'd found a wallet with $2,000 cash at a rest stop and had tracked down the owner to return it, despite desperately needing money himself. The scales agonizingly slowly began to settle toward equilibrium. The plates moved closer together, the good and bad balancing out, approaching a level position that suggested Gabriel's moral cargo was neither overwhelmingly positive nor critically negative. Inspector-designate 17 watched silently, and Gabriel thought he detected something like hope in the faceless man's posture. Perhaps seeing a driver succeed in the weighing was one of the few satisfactions available to these eternal inspectors, a reminder that redemption and balance were possible. Finally, after what felt like hours but might have been only moments, the scales stopped moving. They hung perfectly level, the two plates at exactly the same height, balanced. Neither tipped toward salvation nor damnation, but held in precise equilibrium. Inspector-designate 17 stepped forward and examined the scales closely. He was silent for a long moment, and Gabriel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel sweat running down his back despite the chamber's cool temperature. "Gabriel Enrique Torres," the inspector finally said, "your weighing is complete. The scales show balance. You are neither retained nor condemned. However, you are warned. Your moral cargo stands in equilibrium. This is acceptable, but barely so. Return to the physical world. Continue your career. But know that you will pass through this station again, eventually. Perhaps at the end of your career, or perhaps sooner if your choices tip the balance negatively. The scales remember everything, and next time the judgment may not be so forgiving." Gabriel felt overwhelming relief flood through him. "I can leave? I can go back?" "You can, but you must not speak of this place directly. You may hint, you may warn other drivers in oblique ways, but you cannot describe this station's true nature or location. Those who violate this rule find themselves returning here immediately, and their second weighing is never favorable. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Then go. Your truck awaits. Your cargo awaits. Your journey continues. Drive wisely, Mr. Torres. Drive with awareness that every choice carries weight, that every action tips the balance in one direction or another. The next weighing will account for all the choices you make from this moment forward." Gabriel walked back toward the exit, which had appeared in the wall without him noticing its creation. As he walked, he passed other drivers who were just arriving, men and women with expressions of confusion and fear, being led by faceless inspectors toward their own scales of judgment. Gabriel wanted to warn them, to offer advice or comfort, but Inspector-designate 17's prohibition prevented him from speaking. He emerged from the building into the parking area where his truck sat exactly where he'd left it, engine still idling, refrigeration unit still running. The other trucks, the graveyard of vehicles belonging to drivers who had failed their weighings, were gone. Or perhaps they had never been visible except from inside the station itself. Gabriel climbed into his truck with shaking hands. He put it in gear and drove toward the exit, half expecting to be stopped, to be called back, to find that his release was some kind of cruel trick. But the barrier lifted automatically and he merged back onto Interstate 10 without incident. He checked his clock, 11:49 p.m. 6 minutes had passed since he'd first seen the way station. 6 minutes for what had felt like hours of judgment and revelation. Gabriel picked up his phone and checked the date, still October 31st. No time had been lost. Externally, his brief stop at an impossible way station had been just another routine inspection. But internally, Gabriel had been transformed. He drove the remaining distance to Tucson in a state of heightened awareness, seeing his work, his entire career, through new eyes. Every interaction with other drivers, every decision about speed and safety, every small choice about kindness or indifference carried weight. Literal weight, being measured and recorded somewhere beyond normal perception. Gabriel completed his delivery and returned home to his family in San Diego. He said nothing about the way station, respecting the prohibition against direct description, but his behavior changed noticeably. His wife remarked that he seemed more thoughtful, more deliberate, more concerned with treating people well. His colleagues noticed that he was more patient, more willing to help, more attentive to safety and ethical considerations. Gabriel continued driving for 3 more years after that Halloween night. In that time, he made choices that he hoped would tip his scales favorably. Helping stranded motorists, mentoring new drivers, advocating for better working conditions and safety standards, treating every person he encountered with dignity and respect. He never saw the way station again. But Gabriel knew it was there, somewhere in the space between spaces, measuring and judging, weighing the souls of drivers who believed they were only hauling cargo. And he knew that one day, whether in this life or perhaps the next, he would return to that cinder block building and face a final weighing, a complete accounting of his career and character. Gabriel retired from trucking in 2020, his record unblemished, his reputation solid, his conscience as clear as he could make it. He volunteers now at a truck stop ministry, offering support and counsel to working drivers. He tells them obliquely and carefully that their work matters beyond the cargo they carry, that their choices have weight, that there are things measuring and judging beyond what they can see. Most drivers nod politely and think Gabriel is just an old-timer getting philosophical in retirement. But some, those who have seen strange things on lonely highways, who have encountered the inexplicable and unexplainable, those drivers look at Gabriel with recognition in their eyes. They understand. They've been weighed, or they sense that weighing awaits them. And Gabriel tells these drivers what he can. Drive with integrity. Treat others with kindness. Remember that you're not just moving freight. You're living a life that will be measured. Make sure that when the scales balance, you can face the judgment without fear. Gabriel doesn't know if there are other stations like the one he encountered. Other impossible places where the moral weight of professions is measured and judged. But he suspects there are. Stations for every kind of work, every kind of life, waiting in the spaces between physical reality and something deeper. Places where what we truly carry, the weight of our choices, our actions, our treatment of others, is weighed and evaluated. And he hopes with everything in him that when his final weighing comes, the scales will tip in his favor. That the good he's done will outweigh the failures and shortcuts. That he'll be found worthy rather than wanting. That he won't spend eternity as a faceless inspector measuring others because he himself was measured and found lacking. Gabriel Torres drives past way stations now with a mixture of relief and anxiety, always wondering if one of them might transform, might reveal itself to be Station Zero calling him back for a final accounting. So far, they've all remained normal. Simple inspection facilities, checking weights and paperwork, nothing more. But Gabriel knows the truth. Somewhere in the space between highways and judgment, the scales still hang. They remember everything. They measure everything. And one day, every driver will pull onto that scale and face the weighing of what they truly carried through all their years on the road. Gabriel just hopes that when his time comes, the balance tips toward mercy rather than judgment, toward release rather than retention. And he continues to live in a way that might earn that mercy, might justify that release, might tip those eternal scales just far enough toward light to avoid the darkness of failed weighing and endless inspection duty. The scales are always measuring, The wait is always being calculated, and the station waits patient and eternal for every driver who has ever rolled down a highway carrying cargo and unknowingly carrying the weight of their own soul. Story 2. The fuel that burned backwards. Dominic Russo had been an independent owner-operator for 18 years, running routes primarily through the northeastern United States. He specialized in time-sensitive deliveries, building a reputation for reliability and punctuality that kept his schedule consistently full. On December 14, 2016, Dominic stopped for fuel at what appeared to be an ordinary truck stop in rural Pennsylvania. And that decision would lead him into a nightmare that defied every law of physics and reason he'd ever understood. It was 4:17 a.m. on a brutally cold December morning. Dominic was running a priority delivery from Boston to Pittsburgh, hauling computer equipment for a data center that was scheduled to go online within 48 hours. He'd been driving for 6 hours since leaving Boston, and his fuel gauge was approaching a quarter tank. Time to refuel. The highway through central Pennsylvania was largely empty at this hour, just the occasional vehicle in the endless darkness of forests and small towns. The truck stop appeared ahead with the universal appeal of bright lights and promise of hot coffee. It was a large facility, multiple fuel islands, a decent-sized convenience store, and a restaurant that appeared to be open 24 hours. The signage identified it as Penn's Run Travel Plaza, though Dominic didn't recognize the name. That wasn't particularly unusual. New truck stops opened regularly, and Dominic's routes didn't always take him through this specific area. He pulled up to the diesel pumps and climbed out into the freezing pre-dawn air. The temperature was well below zero, and his breath formed thick clouds that hung in the still air. The fuel island was well lit but completely empty. No other trucks, no other customers, which was slightly unusual for a facility this size even at this hour. Most major truck stops had at least some overnight activity. Dominic swiped his fuel card at the pump. The card reader responded normally, displaying processing, then approved, begin fueling. He removed the nozzle, inserted it into his fuel tank, and squeezed the trigger. Diesel began flowing with the familiar rushing sound and petroleum smell. As Dominic stood holding the nozzle, his mind on the remaining drive ahead and his early morning delivery window, he noticed something strange about the fuel gauge display on the pump. The numbers were counting as expected, showing gallons dispensed and total cost. But they were counting in an odd way, not smoothly incrementing, but jumping in irregular patterns. 5.3 gallons, then 5.1, then 5.4, then 4.9. The numbers fluctuated rather than steadily increasing. Dominic frowned and looked at his truck's fuel gauge through the window. It showed fuel level increasing normally. He dismissed the pump display as a minor malfunction, perhaps a sensor issue or a software glitch. As long as the fuel was actually flowing into his tank, a quirky display wasn't a significant problem. The pump automatically shut off when the tank was full. The final display showed 147.3 gallons dispensed, total cost $412.87. Dominic replaced the nozzle, confirmed the transaction on the card reader, and collected his receipt. Everything appeared normal. He decided to go inside for coffee before continuing his journey. The convenience store was brightly lit and appeared well stocked, but like the fuel island, it was completely empty. No customers, and more strangely, no visible employees. Dominic walked past aisles of snacks and merchandise toward the coffee station in the back. Fresh coffee was brewing, steam rising from pots that had apparently been recently filled. But there was no one behind the counter, no cashier at the register, no other customers browsing the aisles. "Hello?" Dominic called out. "Anyone working here?" No response. The store was silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional creak of the building settling in the cold. Dominic felt unease creeping up his spine, but he rationalized it. Maybe the overnight clerk was in the bathroom. Maybe there was a back office where they were doing paperwork. Rural truck stops sometimes ran with minimal staff during the deadest hours of the night. Dominic poured himself a large coffee, added cream and sugar, and walked to the register. He waited for a minute, then two, but no one appeared. Growing impatient and not wanting to waste time when he had a delivery window to meet, Dominic left a $5 bill on the counter and walked back toward his truck. As he crossed the parking lot, Dominic glanced at his watch. 4:31 a.m. He'd been at the truck stop for about 14 minutes, normal time for a fuel stop and quick coffee. He climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and prepared to pull away. That's when he noticed something impossible. His fuel gauge read 1/4 tank, the same level it had been before he'd stopped to refuel. Dominic stared at the gauge in confusion. He'd just pumped nearly 150 gallons of diesel. His tank should be completely full, but the gauge clearly indicated it was at the same level as before, roughly 25% capacity. He shut off the engine and climbed out again, walking around to his fuel tanks. He opened the cap and looked inside with his flashlight. The tank was definitely not full. He could see the fuel level far below where it should be, exactly matching what his gauge indicated. But that was impossible. He'd watched the fuel pump, had heard the diesel flowing, had felt the weight change in his truck as the tanks filled. Dominic walked back to the pump island. The pump display had reset, showing no record of his recent transaction. He checked his fuel card receipt, which he'd stuffed in his pocket. The receipt was there, clearly showing 147.3 gallons purchased at 4:23 a.m. But his fuel tanks had not filled. Where had 147 gallons of diesel gone? Dominic walked back to the convenience store, now genuinely alarmed. "Hey, I need to speak to a manager. There's a problem with your fuel pumps." Still no response. The store remained empty, eerily silent, showing no evidence that anyone had been there. Even the $5 bill Dominic had left on the counter was gone, though he hadn't heard or seen anyone take it. Dominic pulled out his phone to call the truck stop's customer service number, but he had no cell signal. That wasn't unusual in rural Pennsylvania, but it added to his growing sense that something was very wrong with this place. He decided to simply leave. He'd file a complaint with his fuel card company later, dispute the charge, and report the malfunctioning equipment. Right now, he needed to either find another truck stop to actually refuel or stretch his remaining fuel to reach Pittsburgh and refuel there. Dominic returned to his truck and started driving, pulling back onto the highway heading west. He'd driven about 20 miles when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. His fuel gauge was dropping rapidly, not the normal slow decline of diesel consumption during highway driving, but a fast, visible drop. He watched as the needle moved from 1/4 tank to 1/8, then lower, far faster than should be possible. Dominic immediately began looking for another place to fuel, but this stretch of Pennsylvania highway was remote, with exits few and far between. The nearest truck stop, according to his GPS, was 40 miles ahead. At the rate his fuel was disappearing, he wouldn't make it. The gauge continued dropping, 1/16 tank, 1/32. The low fuel warning light came on, chiming urgently. Dominic had no choice but to pull over before his engine died on the highway. He managed to coast onto the shoulder just as his engine began to sputter from fuel starvation. The truck rolled to a stop, and the engine died. Dominic sat in the cab, stunned and frightened, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten with approaching dawn. His truck was out of fuel despite having had a 1/4 tank just an hour ago, and despite having supposedly refueled at the Penns Run Travel Plaza. None of it made any sense. Diesel doesn't simply vanish. Fuel. Gauges might malfunction, but the actual fuel in the tanks was physical, measurable, real. Dominic grabbed his phone, hoping for cell signal now that he'd driven farther from the remote area where the truck stop had been located. Still nothing. He was stranded on the shoulder of a Pennsylvania highway with no fuel and no way to call for help. As he sat there, watching early morning traffic begin to increase, Dominic noticed something in his mirrors. Another truck had pulled onto the shoulder behind him. A good Samaritan, perhaps, stopping to check if he needed help. Dominic felt relief wash over him. He climbed out and walked back toward the other truck. As he approached, he recognized it with a shock of vertigo. It was his truck. The same company logo, the same unit number, the same small dent in the front bumper that he'd gotten last month in a parking lot. But that was impossible because his truck was behind him. He was standing between two identical trucks, both of them his, both of them showing the same unique identifying features. The driver's door of the second truck opened, and someone climbed out. Dominic felt his reality fracturing as he saw himself walking toward him. Not someone who looked like him, but himself, wearing the same clothes, with the same tired expression. "You stopped at Penn's Run Travel Plaza," the other Dominic said. It wasn't a question. "Who? What?" Dominic couldn't form coherent words. "I'm you, or rather I'm the you from earlier, from about 90 minutes ago. The fuel there doesn't work the way normal fuel works. It burns backwards." "That's impossible. Fuel can't burn backwards." "And yet here we are. I'm you from earlier and you're me from later, and we're both stuck in the same loop. The fuel you pumped? It didn't add to your tank. It removed fuel from your future. Every gallon you pumped at that station was a gallon taken from your future fuel supply. You essentially pumped fuel out of your truck across time." Dominic's mind reeled. That can't be real. Time doesn't work that way. Physics doesn't work that way. The other Dominic laughed bitterly. "I said the same thing when I met myself, which was you from earlier, from the first loop. Or maybe from the 100th loop. I don't know anymore. But here's what I've figured out. Penn's Run Travel Plaza exists outside normal causality. It's a trap disguised as a truck stop. Drivers stop there, pump fuel, and unknowingly create a temporal deficit. The fuel they pump comes from their own future, creating a loop. You stop, you pump, you drive, you run out of fuel, you meet your past self. You try to warn them, but you're already part of the loop and can't change it. Then how do I get out? I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. I've been through this loop dozens of times. Each time I pump fuel at Penn's Run, drive about 20 miles, run out, meet my past self, try to explain, and then..." The other Dominic's expression became haunted. "And then eventually I drive back to Penn's Run to try to get fuel because I'm stranded and desperate, and the loop starts over. I keep living the same few hours over and over, trapped in a temporal cycle caused by fuel that burns backwards through time." Dominic felt panic rising. There has to be a way to break it. If you're me from earlier, then you must have found something, learned something that I can use. I've tried everything. Refusing to pump fuel at Penn's Run, but then I'm stuck with a quarter tank, can't reach my delivery, get stranded anyway. Trying to pump different amounts doesn't matter. The temporal deficit adjusts proportionally. Warning other truckers. They can't see the truck stop. Only certain people can, and only at certain times. It's like the place exists in a pocket of time and only becomes visible to specific targets. As the two Dominics stood on the highway shoulder talking, traffic continued to flow past. Cars and trucks that didn't stop. Drivers who couldn't see or didn't care about two identical trucks and two identical men having an impossible conversation. "There's something else," the other Dominic said quietly. "Each loop I'm slightly different. Older, more tired, more worn down. The loops aren't perfect circles, they're spirals. Each repetition takes something from us. Eventually, I think we'll just fade. Become part of the loop permanently, like the ghost of the truck stop itself. Empty fuel pumps for empty men." Dominic looked at the other version of himself and saw what he meant. The other Dominic looked exhausted beyond normal tiredness, hollowed out, partially translucent in the growing daylight, like a photocopy of a photocopy losing definition with each generation. "How many loops have you done?" Dominic asked. "I've lost count. Dozens, maybe hundreds." Time becomes strange when you're living the same hours over and over. I don't remember much of my life before this anymore. My daughter's name. I know I have a daughter, but I can't remember her face clearly. The memories are burning away like the fuel consumed by the backwards fire. Dominic felt tears streaming down his face. This couldn't be his future. He couldn't accept that he was trapped in an infinite loop, doomed to repeat the same few hours until he faded into nothing but a ghost, feeding the temporal machinery of an impossible truck stop. "What if I don't go back?" Dominic said desperately. "What if I stay here? Don't try to refuel at Penn's Run, just wait for help." "I've tried that. You'll sit here for hours, maybe days, but eventually you'll go back. You're already part of the loop. Penn's Run has its hooks in you. The fuel you pumped is a debt that has to be paid, and the payment is the loop itself. You're caught in the causality like a fish on a line." As they stood there, Dominic noticed something in the distance, another truck approaching from the west, heading east. As it passed, he recognized it. His truck, a third iteration, or perhaps an earlier one, driving toward the trap at Penn's Run Travel Plaza. "That's you," the other Dominic said. "Or me, or us. From a different point in the loop. That version is heading toward Penn's Run for the first time, about to make the mistake of stopping there. We've all seen ourselves from different temporal positions. The loop is like a knot in time, and we keep passing through the same intersection from different angles." Dominic felt his sanity fracturing. He was looking at himself, multiple versions from different iterations of the same impossible few hours. They were all caught in the same trap, all burning the same backwards fuel, all feeding the same temporal paradox. "There must be something at Penn's Run," Dominic said. "Some way to break the loop from the source. If the truck stop is the center of this, then maybe going back there and finding the core of it. Understanding what it really is. I've tried that too. Each time you go into the building, it's slightly different. Different layout, different products, different levels of emptiness. It's like the place itself is shifting, adapting, keeping you from finding its center. It's alive in some sense. Not biological life, but temporal life. It exists by creating these loops, by trapping travelers in time debt caused by backwards burning fuel." Dominic sat down on the guardrail, his head in his hands. He couldn't accept this. There had to be a solution, some way to break free, but the other Dominic, his own future self, worn down by countless loops, was living proof that escape seemed impossible. Traffic continued flowing past. The sun rose higher, illuminating the Pennsylvania landscape. And on the shoulder of Interstate 80, two identical men stood beside two identical trucks, trapped in a conversation that had happened before and would happen again, caught in the temporal machinery of a truck stop that burned fuel backwards through time. "I need to try something different," Dominic finally said. "If you've been through this dozens of times, then I need to make a choice you haven't made. Change some variable in the loop. I've thought that too, every time. But we're limited by the boundaries of the loop. We only have a few hours of time, from Penn's Run to here. What can you change within those boundaries?" Dominic thought hard. Then an idea struck him. What if I don't stop? What if when I reach this point, when my fuel runs low, I keep driving, push the truck until it completely dies, coast as far as possible, try to get beyond the boundaries of where the loop seems to operate? The other Dominic looked thoughtful. "I haven't tried that. Usually I stop as soon as the low fuel warning comes on, try to preserve what's left. But pushing beyond, That might take you outside the loop's geographic range. Maybe there's a limit to how far Penn's Run's effects can reach. Then that's what I'll do. Next iteration, I'll push through, coast as far as I can, try to get beyond whatever boundary keeps this loop contained. The other Dominic nodded slowly. Maybe that'll work. Or maybe you'll just be stranded farther down the road, still trapped but more isolated. But it's worth trying. And if it doesn't work, I'll see you here again. Or you'll see me. Or we'll both see earlier versions of ourselves. The loop continues. As they spoke, the other Dominic began to fade, becoming more transparent, less solid, like morning mist burning away under sunlight. The loop is resetting. I'm returning to my starting point, about to pump fuel at Penn's Run again, even though I know what'll happen. The knowledge doesn't help. The loop is stronger than knowledge. Wait, Dominic called out. Tell me something. Anything that might help. You've been through this so many times, there must be something you've learned. The fading Dominic smiled sadly. The fuel burns backwards, but maybe we can too. Maybe the only way out is to reverse somehow. Go backwards through the loop instead of forward. I don't know how, but think about it. Backwards fuel, backwards loop, backwards escape. Then he was gone. Not slowly vanishing, but simply ceasing to exist in that location, returned to whatever point in the temporal cycle was his current position. Dominic stood alone beside his fuel-empty truck, watching morning traffic flow past, trying to understand what backwards through the loop could mean. And he knew with crushing certainty that he would find out. Because he was trapped now, caught in the machinery of Penn's Run Travel Plaza, burning fuel that didn't exist yet, living hours that repeated endlessly, slowly fading with each iteration until perhaps he became like the empty truck stop itself. A ghost of a person, present but not alive, trapped in time's machinery forever. The sun rose higher, traffic flowed, and somewhere behind him on this highway, another version of Dominic Torres was driving toward Penn's Run Travel Plaza for the first time. About to make the mistake of stopping for fuel at a place where diesel burns backwards and time becomes a trap disguised as convenience. The loop continued. It always continued. And Dominic was now part of its eternal cycling, along with however many other drivers had made the same mistake over the years. Stopping for fuel at the place where fuel burns backwards and every gallon pumped is a gallon taken from your future. Creating debts that can only be paid with endless repetition. Dominic began walking. Not back toward Penn's Run and not forward toward Pittsburgh. He walked off the highway entirely into the Pennsylvania forest, hoping that perhaps leaving the road itself might break the geographic boundaries of the loop. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try something. Had to make a choice that his future self hadn't described making, because the alternative was accepting the loop, and Dominic wasn't ready to accept that he would spend the rest of his existence, possibly eternity, driving the same 20 miles, pumping the same backwards fuel, meeting the same future and past versions of himself, slowly fading into nothing but a temporal echo, feeding a paradox machine disguised as a truck stop. The forest was deep and cold. Dominic walked until he couldn't see the highway anymore. And still he walked, hoping that distance might equal freedom, that leaving the road might mean leaving the loop. But in his heart, Dominic suspected the truth. He was already caught. The fuel debt had been created, and Penn's Run Travel Plaza would continue to exist, would continue to trap drivers, would continue to burn fuel backwards through time, creating loops that fed on human lives and temporal paradoxes. And somewhere in a different point of the loop, another Dominic Torres was just pulling up to the fuel pumps at Penn's Run, about to create the same debt, about to start the same cycle, about to join the eternal spiral of backwards burning fuel and time that repeats endlessly. The loop continues. It always continues, and the fuel burns on, backwards through time, consuming futures to power presents, trapping travelers in temporal machinery that no one fully understands but everyone caught in it learns to fear. Story 3. The Bridge That Went Nowhere. Catherine Wells had been driving commercially for 15 years, specializing in long-haul routes across the American Midwest. She prided herself on knowing the highways intimately. Every exit, every rest stop, every shortcut that could save time or avoid traffic. On May 8, 2015, Catherine discovered a bridge that didn't appear on any map, didn't lead to any documented destination, and would trap her in a journey that seemed to have no end or purpose beyond the act of crossing itself. Catherine was running a delivery from Minneapolis to Kansas City, hauling agricultural equipment scheduled for delivery the following morning. The route was straightforward, Interstate 35 south through Iowa into Missouri, approximately 450 miles that she'd driven countless times. The weather was clear, traffic was moderate, and Catherine expected a routine overnight drive with no complications. Around 10:30 p.m., as Catherine was driving through southern Iowa, about 40 miles north of the Missouri border, her GPS suddenly recalculated her route. The device's calm voice announced, "In 2 miles, take exit 12B, faster route available." Catherine frowned. She knew this stretch of I-35 well, and there was no exit 12B in this area. The exits were numbered, in the 20s through this region. She glanced at the GPS screen, which showed a route veering east off the interstate onto what appeared to be a state highway, then crossing a river via a bridge before rejoining I-35 about 20 miles south. The new route showed a time savings of 18 minutes, significant for a driver on a tight schedule. Catherine was always looking for legitimate shortcuts that could improve her delivery times without compromising safety. If there was an alternate route that cut 18 minutes off her drive, she wanted to use it. When exit 12B appeared exactly where the GPS indicated, Catherine took it without hesitation. The exit ramp led to a well-maintained 2-lane highway heading east through dark farmland. There was no traffic, not unusual for a rural highway at this time of night. The road was smooth, the markings clear, and everything appeared completely normal. Catherine drove for about 10 minutes following the GPS directions when she saw the bridge ahead. It was enormous, far larger than necessary for what her GPS indicated was a minor river crossing. The structure was at least a mile long, maybe more, spanning what must have been a significant waterway. Tall suspension cables rose into the darkness above, and the bridge deck was wide enough for 4 lanes, though only 2 were marked. As Catherine's truck rolled onto the bridge, she felt a subtle change in the air, a pressure shift, like when driving up a mountain or entering a tunnel. The bridge was well lit with sodium vapor lights that cast everything in an orange glow. Catherine could see the bridge stretching ahead into the distance, seemingly endless, though her GPS indicated she should reach the other side in just a few minutes. 5 minutes passed. Catherine was still on the bridge. She checked her GPS, which showed her position as moving forward normally, approaching the far end. But visually, the bridge seemed to extend forever ahead, with no sign of the far shore or the highway she was supposed to rejoin. 10 minutes. Still on the bridge. The suspension cables overhead remained constant. The orange lights continued in their regular spacing, but the far end never seemed to get closer. Catherine's unease was growing. This wasn't right. No bridge was this long. Even the longest bridges in America could be crossed in a matter of minutes at highway speeds. Catherine tried to slow down and turn around, but the bridge had no shoulder, no turnaround space, no way to reverse direction. The lanes were bordered by concrete barriers that prevented any maneuvering. She had no choice but to continue forward. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Catherine was now genuinely frightened. She'd been driving at approximately 50 miles per hour for 20 minutes, meaning she'd traveled over 15 miles on this bridge. That was impossible. There was no 15-mile bridge in Iowa, The longest bridge in the entire state was maybe a mile. Catherine grabbed her CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Northern Star calling any driver in southern Iowa. I'm on a bridge east of I-35 and I can't find the end. Does anybody know this bridge? Can anybody hear me? Only static responded. Catherine tried her cell phone, but she had no signal. She tried the radio again on multiple channels. Nothing but static and the occasional burst of what might have been voices but were too distorted to understand. 30 minutes on the bridge. Catherine could see water far below through gaps in the barriers, a vast expanse that looked more like an ocean than a river. The water was perfectly still, not flowing, just existing as a dark, flat surface that reflected the orange bridge lights in long streaks. The entire scene had a surreal, dreamlike quality that made Catherine question whether she was actually awake. She pinched herself. She slapped her own face. She bit her tongue. The pain was real. She was awake. But the bridge continued endlessly and there was no explanation that made sense. Catherine began looking for any distinguishing features, signs, markers, emergency call boxes, anything that might give her information about where she was or how to get off this bridge. But there was nothing, just endless pavement, concrete barriers, suspension cables, and orange lights. The bridge was completely uniform with no variation in its structure or appearance. 45 minutes. An hour. Catherine was crying now, terrified and disoriented. She'd driven over 50 miles on a bridge that shouldn't exist. Her fuel gauge was dropping steadily. If she didn't find the end soon, she'd run out of fuel while still on this bridge, and then what? She'd be stranded on an infinite span with no way to call for help and no hope of rescue. As the second hour of bridge crossing began, Catherine noticed something ahead, another vehicle, a truck moving in the same direction about a quarter mile in front of her. Catherine felt a surge of hope and relief. She wasn't alone. There was another driver who must know something about this bridge, who might be able to help or at least confirm that this experience was real. Catherine accelerated, trying to catch up to the other truck. But as she drew closer, she felt a chill of recognition. The truck ahead was identical to hers, same company logo, same model, same license plate number. It was her truck. Catherine was somehow catching up to herself. She slowed down, her mind reeling. This was impossible on every level. She couldn't be ahead of herself. There was no way her truck could be in two places simultaneously. But there it was, clearly visible in her headlights. Her own truck, driving the same endless bridge. As Catherine slowed, the distance between the two trucks stabilized. She was now following herself at a fixed distance, both trucks moving at the same speed, creating a strange procession of identical vehicles on an impossible bridge. Then Catherine saw a third truck farther ahead, and beyond that, a fourth. All of them identical, all of them hers. She was following herself and herself and herself again in an infinite regression of identical trucks driven by identical drivers, all trapped on the same endless bridge. Catherine pulled over to the right lane, or tried to. But as she steered right, her truck didn't change position relative to the barriers. The bridge seemed to shift with her, keeping her centered, preventing any deviation from the forward path. She tried steering left with the same result. The bridge was forcing her forward, allowing no variation in position or direction. Hours passed. Catherine's sense of time began to deteriorate. She would glance at her clock and see 1:47 a.m., then what felt like minutes later check again and see 1:51 a.m. Or sometimes she'd check and see 1:44 a.m., time moving backward. Her fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, then half, then 3/4 again. The physical laws governing her truck and the bridge seemed to be becoming unstable or non-linear. Catherine tried to count the infinite trucks ahead of her but lost track after 17. Each one was perfectly identical, same rust spot on the passenger door, same mud splatter pattern on the trailer, same slightly crooked company decal. They were all her, stretched across time or space or some dimension that combined both. At some point, Catherine couldn't be sure when because her perception of time had become completely unreliable. She saw something different ahead. Not another truck, but a figure standing on the bridge deck directly in the lane. Catherine slowed, and as she approached, she saw that the figure was a woman in a driver's uniform. It was Catherine herself, standing on the bridge, looking exhausted and defeated, waiting as her own truck approached. Catherine stopped her truck, or rather her truck stopped on its own, as if the bridge had decided this was the appropriate stopping point. She sat frozen in her cab, staring at her own figure standing just 20 feet ahead in her headlights. The standing Catherine walked to the driver's door and gestured for truck Catherine to roll down the window. With trembling hands, Catherine complied. "You've been driving for 7 hours," the standing Catherine said. Her voice was hoarse, tired, barely above a whisper. "Or 7 minutes or 7 years. Time doesn't work right here. The bridge is outside normal causality." "What is this place? How do I get off?" "This is the bridge, capital B. It's always been here, or maybe it just came into existence the moment you entered it. It exists to be crossed, but crossing it never ends because ending would contradict its essential nature. It's an infinite span across an impossible distance between 2 points that might not actually exist. That's insane. Bridges connect places. They have beginnings and ends. Normal. Bridges do. This isn't a normal bridge. This is what happens when infrastructure becomes uncoupled from geography. When the concept of crossing becomes separated from the concept of arriving. You're on a bridge that is only crossing, never arrival. The act of bridging without any shores to bridge between. Catherine felt her sanity straining. "How do you know this? And why are you outside the truck?" "Because I've been here longer than you. I'm you from farther ahead or farther behind. Direction gets confused here. I stopped my truck hours or days ago, got out to investigate to find some kind of exit or explanation. But there is none. Just bridge, endlessly. And the more you engage with it, the more copies of yourself you create stretched across its infinite length like pearls on a string. The trucks ahead, those are all me? Yes. And behind you there are more. Every moment you spend on this bridge creates another instance of you. Another truck, another driver trapped in the crossing. We're multiplying across the bridge's length, filling it with iterations of the same journey. Then how do I stop? How do I get out?" The standing Catherine looked sad. "I don't know if you can. I've walked for what felt like days in both directions. The bridge never ends. There are no access panels, no maintenance doors, no emergency exits, just endless deck and barriers and cables and lights. And other drivers, not just me, but others. I've seen dozens of different trucks, different drivers, all trapped here, all endlessly crossing." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "There has to be a way. I have a delivery, I have a life. I can't be trapped on an infinite bridge. Your delivery doesn't matter here. Your life is what it is now, crossing this bridge. Accept it or don't, but the bridge doesn't care. It exists to be crossed, and you're crossing it, and that's all there is." Catherine looked ahead at the infinite line of her own trucks, behind at the infinite line of her past selves, and felt something break inside her. This was her existence now. Endless forward motion without progress. Eternal crossing without arrival, infinite journey without destination. "What happened to the other drivers you saw?" Catherine asked. "Most keep driving. They haven't accepted the reality yet, so they continue forward, hoping the bridge will end, hoping they'll find an exit. Some have stopped, like me, and wander the deck searching for something that isn't there. A few have climbed the barriers and jumped into the water below, choosing to end it rather than accept eternity on the bridge. Did that work? Did jumping end it? I don't know. I never saw them surface or heard them hit the water. They just fell into the darkness below, and I never saw what happened next. Maybe they escaped. Maybe they died. Maybe they're trapped in the water instead of on the bridge, endlessly sinking through infinite depth. There's no way to know except to try. Catherine looked through her window at the vast water below. It was still perfectly motionless like glass, reflecting the orange lights in perfect symmetry. Jumping would mean abandoning any hope of return, any possibility of seeing her family again, any chance that this nightmare had an explanation or solution. But continuing meant accepting this as her existence. Endless crossing, infinite iterations of herself stretched across an impossible span, trapped in the act of bridging without purpose or destination. "I'm going to keep driving," Catherine finally said. "I'm going to believe there's an end." "Even if you've given up believing," the standing Catherine smiled sadly. "I said the same thing hours ago, or days. You'll keep driving and eventually you'll get out of your truck and you'll become me standing here telling your past self that there's no end. That's how it works. You're living through what I already experienced. Then the loop can be broken. If I'm you from before, then I can make different choices, change the outcome. I thought that too, but the bridge has its own logic. You'll make the same choices because you're in the same situation with the same information and the same personality. We're deterministic copies, Catherine. We can't change because we're the same person experiencing the same thing." Catherine rolled up her window without responding. She put her truck in gear and drove forward, passing the standing version of herself, continuing down the infinite bridge. In her mirrors, she watched the standing Catherine grow smaller, becoming just another fixed point in the endless landscape of crossing. Catherine drove for what might have been hours or days or years. Her fuel gauge fluctuated wildly. Her clock became meaningless. She passed thousands of versions of her own truck, each driven by a version of herself at different points of degradation and acceptance. Some of the driving Catherines looked fresh, recently arrived, still hopeful. Others looked exhausted, barely conscious, driving on pure automation. Some trucks were empty, abandoned by Catherines who had given up and wandered off to explore or jump or simply sit and wait for nothing. Eventually, though eventually had no meaning here, Catherine's truck ran out of fuel. Or perhaps it simply decided to stop. The engine died and the truck coasted to a halt. Catherine sat in the cab for a long time, looking at the infinite bridge stretching in both directions, at the identical trucks ahead and behind, at the perfectly still water below. Then she got out. She walked to the barrier and looked down. The water was impossibly far below, farther than any bridge deck should be from the water it crosses. The drop must have been thousands of feet, maybe infinite itself. The water's surface reflected her face, tired, defeated, trapped. Catherine considered jumping. It would be so easy. Just climb over the barrier and let go. Fall into whatever waited below, death or freedom or another trap. It didn't matter because anything would be different from this. But instead, Catherine walked forward along the bridge deck. Not because she believed she'd find an end, but because walking felt slightly more purposeful than sitting, slightly more human than giving up entirely. She passed her own trucks, sometimes waving at herself in the driver's seat. Some of the driving Catherines waved back. Others didn't see her or chose not to acknowledge her. Catherine walked for what felt like weeks, maybe months, seeing thousands of trucks, hundreds of other drivers from other vehicles trapped in their own infinite crossings. She met a man named Robert who'd been crossing for what he claimed was 7 years. He'd given up on time measurement and had developed a philosophy about the bridge. that it was a purgatory for drivers who had somehow failed in their duties, who needed to cross eternally as penance for sins related to their profession. She met a woman named Angela who believed the bridge was an alien experiment, studying human behavior under conditions of infinite journey. Angela had covered sections of the bridge deck with calculations and theories, trying to find patterns in the lights or the cable spacing that might reveal a hidden exit. She met a young man named Marcus who had gone insane from the crossing, who now believed he was the bridge itself, that his consciousness had merged with the structure, that he was crossing himself in an act of infrastructure, becoming aware. Catherine talked to all of them, hearing their theories and stories, their despair and their coping mechanisms. And she realized that the bridge had been collecting drivers for a very long time, that there were perhaps thousands of people trapped here, all endlessly crossing, all searching for meaning or exit or acceptance. Years passed, or no time passed. Catherine couldn't tell anymore. She alternated between walking and sitting, sometimes finding her truck again and sitting in the cab, sometimes wandering far from it to explore different sections of the bridge. She saw her own past selves driving past, occasionally her future selves walking or sitting. The temporal logic of the bridge allowed for meeting yourself from different points of your personal timeline, creating conversations and interactions that were simultaneously past and future. Catherine never found an end. She never found an exit. The bridge continued infinitely in both directions, and her existence became the crossing itself. Not traveling toward a destination, but simply existing in the state of traversing, eternally between shores that didn't exist. Sometimes Catherine thought about her life before the bridge, her family, her deliveries, her normal existence of traveling between real places that had names and coordinates. Those memories faded over time, becoming less real than the bridge, less substantial than the endless orange lights and suspension cables. She became part of the bridge's population, another lost driver among thousands, all trapped in eternal crossing, all existing in the space between departure and arrival that had somehow expanded to consume their entire existence. The bridge had no purpose except to be crossed, and Catherine had no purpose except to cross it. The two had merged, driver and bridge, journey and destination becoming one endless present of crossing that stretched infinitely forward and back through space and time and whatever other dimensions the bridge occupied. And somewhere on some highway in Iowa, a GPS device occasionally suggests an exit that doesn't officially exist, showing a shortcut that saves 18 minutes by crossing a bridge that leads nowhere except to itself, trapping another driver in the eternal act of crossing, adding another truck to the infinite procession, another soul to the population of travelers who exist between shores that were never there. The bridge continues to exist. It always continues, and drivers continue to cross it infinitely, eternally, becoming part of its structure, part of its purpose, part of the endless journey that is simultaneously every moment and no moment, every place and no place. A crossing that never completes because completion would end its existence, and the bridge's nature is to be crossed forever. Catherine Wells is still there, somewhere on that infinite span, walking or sitting or perhaps climbing back into one of her infinite trucks to drive a bit farther into the endlessness. She's given up on escape. She's accepted that her existence is now the bridge, that crossing is her nature as much as it's the bridge's nature. And if you're driving through southern Iowa someday and your GPS suggests an exit that doesn't match the official exit numbers, showing a shortcut across a bridge that promises to save you time, think carefully before you take it. Because the time you save might be time subtracted from your entire future, condensed into an eternal present of crossing a bridge that leads nowhere except to more bridge, more crossing, more infinite journey without destination or meaning. The bridge is still there. It's always there. And it's always waiting for the next driver who believes in shortcuts, who trusts GPS directions, who thinks that crossing means arriving somewhere, rather than simply crossing forever. Story 4. The rest area where morning never came. Julian Baptiste had been a professional driver for 12 years, running primarily overnight routes along the East Coast. He specialized in early morning deliveries, which meant driving through the night when traffic was light and roads were clear. On September 23, 2018, Julian pulled into a rest area in rural Virginia for what should have been a brief stop, and found himself trapped in a night that refused to end, in a darkness that had somehow become permanent. It was 2:17 a.m. when Julian exited Interstate 81 at a rest area south of Staunton, Virginia. He'd been driving for 5 hours since leaving Maryland and needed a break. Bathroom, coffee, maybe a quick walk to shake off the fatigue that was accumulating despite his experience with overnight driving. The rest area was a standard facility: parking lot, restroom building, vending machines, picnic areas with tables under pavilions. As Julian pulled into a parking spot, he noticed that the rest area was unusually crowded for this time of night. At least 20 other vehicles were parked: trucks, cars, RVs. A diverse collection that suggested this was a popular stopping point. Lights in the main building were on, and Julian could see other travelers moving around inside, which gave him a sense of security and normalcy. Julian entered the restroom, used the facilities, and washed his hands while studying his reflection in the mirror. He looked tired but alert enough to continue driving. His delivery window was 7 a.m. in Knoxville, and he was making good time. Another 4 hours of driving and he'd arrive with time to spare. As Julian walked back outside, he checked his watch. 2:31 a.m. 14 minutes had passed. He walked toward the vending machines to get coffee. The machine dispensed a cup with its usual mechanical efficiency, and Julian sipped the mediocre but welcome caffeine while walking around the parking lot to stretch his legs. He noticed other travelers doing the same: a man in a business suit pacing near the picnic area while talking on his cell phone, a woman walking her dog along the designated pet area, an elderly couple sitting at a picnic table sharing food from a cooler. Everyone looked normal, engaged in typical rest area activities. Julian finished his coffee, threw the cup in a recycling bin, and returned to his truck. According to his watch, it was now 2:49 a.m. He'd been stopped for 32 minutes, slightly longer than planned, but not problematic. He started his engine and prepared to return to the highway. As Julian drove toward the rest area exit, he noticed something strange. The sky was still completely dark, not the pre-dawn darkness where you can detect a lightning on the eastern horizon, but the deep, absolute darkness of midnight or later. Julian frowned. By 2:49 a.m. in late September, there should be at least a hint of approaching dawn. Not bright, but a subtle change in the quality of the darkness. But the sky was uniformly black, with stars still brilliantly visible and no suggestion of dawn approaching. Julian dismissed it as a miscalculation on his part. Maybe he'd misjudged the time of sunrise for this latitude and season. He merged back onto I-81 southbound and continued his route toward Tennessee. He drove for what felt like 30 minutes, watching the mile markers count upward, making steady progress. Then he checked his GPS to see how far he'd traveled. According to the device, he was still at the rest area. His position hadn't changed, despite driving at highway speeds for half an hour. Julian pulled over on the shoulder, confused. He checked his odometer. It showed he'd traveled 27 miles since leaving the rest area. But his GPS insisted he was still there, still parked in the same spot. He attempted to recalibrate the GPS, turning it off and restarting it. When it powered back on, it showed the same thing. Julian's current position was at the rest area, milepost 222 on I-81. Julian put his truck back in gear and continued driving, this time watching both his odometer and his surroundings carefully. The highway looked normal: standard interstate, periodic overhead signs, occasional vehicles. But after another 20 minutes of driving, Julian saw a green exit sign ahead. Rest area next right. It was the same rest area, the same exit he'd left 45 minutes earlier. Julian's heart began to pound. That wasn't possible. He'd been driving south at highway speeds. He should be nearly 50 miles from that rest area by now. But there it was. The same facility, impossible to mistake for a different location because of its distinctive architecture and landscaping. Julian took the exit again, feeling compelled to understand what was happening. He pulled into the same parking area and got out of his truck. The rest area looked identical to how it had appeared an hour earlier. Same vehicles, same people, same level of activity. Julian walked to the man in the business suit who was still pacing near the picnic area, still talking on his phone. As Julian approached, he could hear the man's conversation. "I know, honey, but I'll be home soon. The rest stop is just a quick break. I'll be back on the road in a few minutes and home by morning." The man had been saying similar things when Julian had seen him an hour ago. It was as if his conversation had paused and resumed at the same point. "Excuse me," Julian interrupted. The man looked up, annoyed at the intrusion. "What time is it?" The man checked his watch. 2:52 a.m., can I help you with something? Julian felt cold spread through his body. According to his own watch, it was 3:47 a.m. But this man's watch showed 2:52 a.m., approximately the same time it had been when Julian first left the rest area an hour ago. "How long have you been here?" Julian asked. "Just pulled in about 10 minutes ago." "Why?" "I saw you here over an hour ago. You've been here much longer than 10 minutes. The man's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just arrived. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm on an important call." He turned away and Julian heard him resume. "I know, honey, but I'll be home soon. The rest stop is just a quick break." The exact same words Julian had heard before. Julian walked toward the woman with the dog. She was still walking the same circuit around the pet area, the dog still sniffing the same patches of grass with the same level of interest. "Excuse me, how long have you been walking your dog?" The woman looked at Julian strangely. "Just a few minutes. We just got here. Is something wrong?" Julian backed away without answering. He walked to the elderly couple at the picnic table. They were eating sandwiches from a cooler, and Julian could see that the sandwiches were whole, unwrapped, exactly as they had been when he'd first seen them over an hour ago. Everyone at the rest area believed they had just arrived. Everyone's watches showed approximately 2:50 a.m. But Julian had been here over an hour ago, had left, had driven for nearly an hour, and had somehow ended up back at the same location with time having apparently reset. Julian pulled out his cell phone to call someone, anyone, who could confirm the time and his location. But his phone showed no service despite the screen indicating it was 3:51 a.m., an hour ahead of everyone else's time. Julian got back in his truck and drove to the rest area exit. This time, instead of merging back onto I-81 southbound, he turned north, heading back toward Maryland. If he was somehow trapped in a loop connected to traveling south, maybe traveling north would break it. He drove north for 45 minutes, watching the mile markers count backward, seeing the landscape pass normally. Then ahead, he saw a green sign. Rest area next right. The same rest area. Despite driving north away from it, the rest area appeared in front of him. Julian pulled over on the shoulder, his hands shaking. He was trapped in some kind of spatial loop centered on the rest area. No matter which direction he drove, he ended up returning to it. And time was behaving strangely, advancing for him but resetting at the rest area, where other travelers appeared to be caught in repetitive behaviors without realizing it. Julian sat in his truck for a long time, trying to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. GPS malfunction combined with disorientation could make him think he was traveling in one direction while actually circling back. But that didn't explain the time discrepancies or the repetitive behavior of other travelers. He decided to stay at the rest area and wait for dawn. If dawn came, if morning arrived normally, then this was all some bizarre disorientation that would resolve with daylight and clarity. Julian parked his truck and settled in to wait. He watched his clock, 4:17 a.m., 4:42 a.m., 5:11 a.m. Time advanced normally on his devices, but the sky remained completely dark. No hint of dawn appeared on any horizon. The stars didn't move. The darkness didn't change in quality or depth. At 6 a.m., according to Julian's watch, a time when the sky should be brightening noticeably, the rest area was still deep in absolute night, and the other travelers continued their repetitive behaviors. The businessman pacing and talking on his phone, the woman walking her dog, the elderly couple eating and re-eating their sandwiches. Julian got out and approached a family that was unpacking a cooler near a picnic table, a mother, father, and 2 young children. He watched them for several minutes. Their movements were fluid and natural, not obviously robotic or looped, but they unpacked the same items from the cooler multiple times. A bag of chips, a package of cookies, juice boxes for the children. Each item would be placed on the table, then a moment later would be back in the cooler, ready to be unpacked again. "Hello," Julian said to the mother. "Can I ask what time you arrived here?" The woman smiled pleasantly. "Oh, just a few minutes ago. The kids needed a bathroom break. We're heading to visit my sister in Knoxville." "What time is it now?" She checked her phone. "About 2:55 a.m. We want to get back on the road soon so we can arrive by breakfast time." Julian's watch showed 6:14 a.m., over 3 hours difference from what this woman's phone indicated. "Does the time seem strange to you?" Julian asked carefully. "Does it feel like more time has passed than your phone shows?" The woman looked confused. "I don't think so. Why do you ask? What's the last thing you remember before arriving here?" "We were driving south on 81. The kids said they needed to stop. We took this exit, that's all." "Do you remember how long you've been stopped?" "Like I said, just a few minutes." But as the woman said this, Julian saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes, as if she was trying to reconcile what she believed with what she felt. Julian walked away before he could disturb her further. He was beginning to understand what was happening. The rest area existed in some kind of temporal bubble where time had stopped at approximately 2:50 a.m. People entering the rest area became trapped in that frozen moment, their activities becoming repetitive loops, their memories resetting to maintain the illusion that they had just arrived. But Julian's watch and phone were still advancing, still tracking time from outside the bubble. He was caught between 2 temporal states, trapped physically in the location but not fully synchronized with its frozen time. Julian spent hours walking around the rest area, documenting the repetitive behaviors, trying to find any variation or anomaly that might suggest a way out. He found none. The rest area was perfectly consistent. Same people, same actions, same time, all trapped in an eternal 2:50 a.m. that never progressed toward dawn. Around what his watch indicated was 9 a.m., a time when the sun should be well above the horizon and the rest area should be bright with morning light. Julian noticed something new. Some of the vehicles were beginning to fade, becoming translucent. The people associated with those vehicles were fading too, becoming ghost-like, less substantial. Julian approached a fading van where a family of 4 was sitting at a picnic table. He could see through them now, could see the picnic table right through their bodies. The mother was still going through the motions of unpacking food, but her movements were becoming slower, more sluggish, like a video running out of power. Within another hour by Julian's watch, that family had disappeared entirely. The van was gone. It was as if they had never been there. Julian realized with horror what was happening. The people trapped here didn't remain forever. They existed in the frozen time for a while, hours or days from their own perspective, though external time continued advancing. And then they simply faded away, dissolved into the temporal anomaly, ceased to exist. The rest area was consuming them. More vehicles began to fade over the following hours. The businessman with the phone became translucent around 11:00 a.m. by Julian's watch, and by noon he had vanished completely, leaving no trace. The woman with the dog faded shortly after. The elderly couple disappeared around 1:00 p.m. New vehicles arrived to replace them. Other travelers who took the exit entered the rest area and became trapped in the same frozen 2:50 a.m. moment. They would exist here for a while, going through their repetitive behaviors, then fade and disappear as the anomaly consumed them. Julian watched with growing terror as the cycle repeated. The rest area was a trap, collecting travelers and slowly dissolving them into nothing while maintaining the illusion of a normal, safe stopping point. And Julian was trapped here too. But because his time sense hadn't fully synchronized with the bubble, he was aware of what was happening. He could see the trap clearly, but he couldn't escape it. Every attempt to drive away led him back here. Days passed according to Julian's watch and phone, though the sky remained eternally dark, the rest area eternally frozen at 2:50 a.m. Julian watched hundreds of travelers arrive, exist briefly in their repetitive loops, then fade away. He tried to warn some of them, but they couldn't understand. Their memories kept resetting. Their perception kept telling them they had just arrived, and they couldn't comprehend Julian's warnings about time loops and fading. Julian began to wonder if he would fade too, if eventually his temporal desynchronization would resolve and he'd merge fully with the frozen moment, begin going through repetitive behaviors, then slowly dissolve into nothing like all the others. On what his watch indicated was the 7th day, though the sun had never risen, though the darkness had remained absolute. Julian felt it beginning. His memories of his life before the rest area were becoming foggy. He was forgetting faces, names, places. His sense of self was deteriorating. He walked back to his truck and found he couldn't quite remember what cargo he'd been carrying or where he'd been going. Knoxville. Had that been his destination? He couldn't be sure anymore. Julian pulled out his phone and found photos of his family, his wife, his children. But he struggled to remember their names. The memories were there but fading, like old photographs left in sunlight too long, the details bleaching away. He was beginning to fade, just like the others. Julian sat at a picnic table and tried to hold on to himself, tried to remember who he was and why he needed to escape. But it was becoming harder. The rest area felt comfortable, familiar. The idea of leaving seemed strange. Why would he leave? He just arrived. He just needed a brief rest. Then he'd continue his journey. Julian's watch showed dates advancing. Days, then weeks, then months. But to Julian, it felt like he'd been at the rest area for just a few hours. The temporal desynchronization was resolving. He was merging with the frozen moment, losing his awareness of external time. Other travelers came and went. Julian sometimes tried to talk to them, but he could no longer quite remember what he'd been trying to warn them about. Something about time, about not leaving. The thoughts wouldn't cohere properly. Julian began going through repetitive behaviors without realizing it. He'd walk to his truck, check his cargo, walk back to the picnic area. Then he'd do it again and again. The actions felt purposeful each time, as if he was doing them for the first time, though some fading part of his consciousness recognized the repetition. According to Julian's watch, which he checked occasionally without really understanding what the numbers meant anymore, over a year passed. The rest area remained frozen at 2:50 a.m. The sky remained dark. New travelers arrived, existed briefly, faded away. And Julian existed among them, increasingly translucent, increasingly repetitive, his consciousness fragmenting into simple loops of behavior that felt purposeful but led nowhere. Eventually, Julian could no longer read his watch. The numbers meant nothing. Time itself meant nothing. There was only the rest area, the eternal dark, the other travelers going through their rituals. Julian faded slowly over what external time would measure as months or years. His physical form became more and more translucent. His behaviors became more and more mechanical. The last vestiges of his awareness, his knowledge that he was trapped, that something was wrong, that he needed to escape, dissolved into the temporal anomaly that had consumed hundreds or thousands of other travelers before him. The rest area continues to exist on I-81 in Virginia, collecting travelers who stop at the wrong moment, trapping them in an eternal 2:50 a.m. where morning never comes and the night never ends. They exist in that frozen moment for a while, going through their repetitive behaviors, convinced they just arrived, unaware that they're fading, being slowly consumed by a temporal anomaly that disguises itself as a safe place to rest. Julian Baptiste's truck was eventually found at the rest area, abandoned with no sign of the driver. His family filed a missing person report. Investigators found nothing, no evidence of foul play, no explanation for his disappearance. The case remains unsolved. But Julian is still there in a sense. A faint presence in the rest area, barely visible even to those few travelers who arrive with the temporal awareness to see what's really happening. A ghost going through motions, checking cargo that isn't there, walking routes that lead nowhere, trapped in a moment that never progresses toward morning. The rest area is still operating. Travelers still stop there, use the facilities, take brief breaks. Most leave without incident, departing before the temporal trap engages. But some, those who arrive at exactly the wrong moment, who enter the bubble at exactly the wrong phase, become trapped in the eternal 2:50 a.m. in the darkness that never yields to dawn. And if you're driving I-81 through Virginia late at night, and you see a rest area that seems particularly crowded for the hour, where travelers move with slightly mechanical precision, where the same vehicles seem to be there every time you pass, consider driving on to the next facility, because that rest area collects more than travelers. It collects their time, their awareness, their existence, slowly dissolving them into an eternal night where morning is always promised but never arrives. Julian learned too late that some rest areas aren't meant for rest at all. They're meant for something else, for collection, for consumption, for the slow dissolution of travelers into temporal anomalies that feed on human presence and awareness. The night continues there, eternal and hungry. And the rest area waits for the next traveler who stops at exactly the wrong moment and never leaves. Story 5. The Convoy That Followed Home. Michael Thornton had been driving long-haul routes for 23 years, and in that time he'd developed a strong instinct for when something on the road wasn't right. On November 11th, 2017, Michael noticed a convoy of trucks following him, and despite his attempts to lose them, escape them, or understand their purpose, they followed him all the way to his home and beyond. Michael was returning from a delivery run to Phoenix, heading back to his home in suburban Nashville. It was the last leg of a week-long circuit, and Michael was looking forward to being home for a few days before his next assignment. The route took him through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and into Tennessee, familiar highways that Michael had traveled countless times. Around 3 p.m., as Michael was driving through East Texas on Interstate 20, he noticed 3 trucks in his mirrors. They were traveling in formation, not the casual loose grouping that sometimes happens when trucks traveling at similar speeds end up near each other, but a precise, deliberate formation with exact spacing between vehicles. All 3 were identical, black Peterbilt tractors pulling black trailers with no company markings or identifying information. Michael thought nothing of it initially. Unmarked trucks weren't particularly unusual, especially for companies that preferred discreet transportation of sensitive or valuable cargo. Michael changed lanes, and the three trucks changed lanes with him, maintaining their precise spacing and their position behind him. Coincidence, Michael thought. They're just heading in the same direction. An hour later, as Michael took an exit to refuel, he watched his mirrors carefully. The three black trucks also took the exit. They pulled into the same truck stop, parking at adjacent fuel islands. Michael finished fueling and walked into the convenience store for coffee. Through the window, he could see the three trucks, engines running, but no drivers emerged. The cabs appeared empty. Michael felt unease creeping up his spine. He walked back to his truck, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. Within minutes, the three black trucks were behind him again, in their same precise formation. Michael decided to test whether they were actually following him. He took the next exit randomly, a small town with no logical reason to stop there. The three black trucks took the same exit. Michael drove through the town, making random turns, going down residential streets, then getting back on the highway. The three trucks followed every turn, maintaining their spacing, never varying their formation. Now Michael was genuinely concerned. These trucks were definitely following him. But why? And who was driving them? From his elevated position in his own truck, Michael could look down into the cabs of the following vehicles, and they still appeared empty. No visible drivers, no movement, just three black trucks maintaining precise formation and following his exact route. Michael grabbed his CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Mountain Mike calling the three black Peterbilts on I-20 eastbound. Identify yourself. Why are you following me? No response, not even static, just complete silence, as if the radio had stopped functioning entirely. Michael tried his cell phone, calling a fellow driver friend. Hey, Ronnie, I've got a weird situation. Three unmarked trucks have been following me for hours. They're maintaining formation, mimicking my every move. I can't see any drivers in the cabs. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Ronnie was quiet for a moment. Brother, that doesn't sound right. Could be some kind of surveillance or corporate thing. Maybe they think you're someone else. For 3 hours? And why no visible drivers? I don't know, man. Be careful. Call the highway patrol if they keep following you. Michael tried calling the state police, but his phone kept losing signal. Every time he'd dial, the call would drop before connecting. He could receive calls and texts just fine, but outgoing calls to emergency services or law enforcement wouldn't go through. The three trucks continued following as Michael drove through Louisiana. When he stopped for a mandatory rest break, they stopped nearby. When he resumed driving, they resumed following. Their behavior was identical to his own, but delayed by exactly the right amount to maintain their precise spacing. As evening fell and Michael crossed into Mississippi, he noticed something that made his terror escalate. There were now 4 trucks following him. A 4th black Peterbilt had joined the convoy, positioned perfectly in the formation, indistinguishable from the others. Michael hadn't seen it join. There had been no exit where a new truck could have merged. The 4th truck had simply appeared, as if it had materialized from nothing to expand the convoy. By the time Michael reached the Mississippi-Alabama border around 9:00 p.m., there were 6 trucks following him, then 8, then 12. The convoy was growing, multiplying, each new truck identical to the others, each maintaining the precise formation, each following Michael's every move. Michael was crying now, terrified beyond anything he'd experienced in 23 years of driving. He called his wife. Sarah, listen to me. Something impossible is happening. I'm being followed by a convoy of trucks, dozens of them now. They're multiplying. I don't know what they are or what they want, but they're following me home. I'm still hours away, but they're going to follow me all the way there. Michael, what are you talking about? Call the police. Stop somewhere safe. I've tried calling police. My phone won't connect. And there is no safe place to stop. These trucks stop wherever I stop. They're locked onto me somehow. Then don't come home. Drive somewhere else. Lead them away from here. Michael considered this. I'll try. I'll try to lead them somewhere else. He took the next exit, heading north instead of continuing east toward Nashville. The growing convoy followed. Now there were 20 trucks, then 30. They filled multiple lanes of the highway, all perfectly spaced, all moving in synchronized formation. Michael drove north for an hour, hoping to lead the convoy away from his home, away from his family. But the convoy continued to multiply, 50 trucks, 70, 100. They stretched behind him as far as his mirrors could show, an impossible procession of identical black vehicles following his every move. Around 11 RPM, Michael's fuel was getting low. He'd been driving for nearly 12 hours total, and he needed to stop. He pulled into a truck stop near Memphis, hoping that the crowd and lights would somehow disrupt whatever was causing this phenomenon. The convoy followed him into the parking lot. Over 100 black trucks entered the facility, filling every available space surrounding Michael's truck. And finally, when they had him completely encircled, they all shut off their engines simultaneously. The sudden silence was deafening. Michael sat in his cab surrounded by black trucks, all of them dark and silent. Then, in perfect synchronization, all of their interior lights came on, illuminating the cabs. Each cab contained a driver, and each driver was Michael Thornton. In every truck surrounding him, Michael could see himself sitting in the driver's seat, staring back at his own truck with the same expression of terror he knew was on his own face. 100 copies of Michael Thornton, all trapped in identical black trucks, all arranged in perfect formation around the original. Michael screamed. He couldn't help it. The sight of his own face repeated infinitely in all directions, all wearing his expression, all moving in mirror synchronization to his own movements. It shattered something fundamental in his psyche. Then the copies began to speak. Their voices came through Michael's CB radio, overlapping, creating a cacophony of his own voice repeated 100 times. Michael Thornton, you have been selected, you have been replicated, your journey has been documented, measured, and reproduced. You are now part of the convoy. You have always been part of the convoy. Every route you've driven, every mile you've traveled has been recorded and duplicated. We are you, you are us. The convoy is eternal, and you are its newest iteration. Michael tried to start his truck to escape, but the engine wouldn't turn over. His truck was dead, powerless, trapped among its own copies. "What do you want?" Michael shouted into the CB radio. "What is this?" The 100 voices responded in perfect unity. "We don't want. We replicate. We document. We preserve. Every driver, every route, every journey is eventually copied and added to the convoy. You have traveled long enough. You have become worthy of replication. Your driving life will continue forever, copied endlessly, traveling eternal routes. You will never stop driving, Michael Thornton. Even after your body fails, your pattern will continue in the convoy. You are immortalized in motion." Michael tried his phone again, desperately calling Sarah. This time, the call connected. "Michael, where are you?" "I'm at a truck stop near Memphis. Sarah, something's happening to me. There are copies of me, copies of my truck. I don't understand what's happening, but I think I might not make it home." "Michael, you're not making sense. Come home. Please just come home. I love you. Tell the kids I love them. If I don't make it back..." The phone went dead. All power in Michael's truck shut off completely. The dashboard went dark. The lights died. Even his watch stopped ticking. Then, one by one, the copies of Michael in the surrounding trucks began to fade. They became translucent, ghost-like, and finally disappeared entirely. The black trucks remained, but the drivers vanished, leaving empty cabs. Michael felt something changing in himself. He looked at his hands and saw them becoming translucent too. He was fading just like the copies had faded. His physical form was dissolving, being replaced by something else. As Michael faded from his original truck, he felt his consciousness expanding, splitting, multiplying. He could suddenly perceive himself in all the black trucks simultaneously. He was in 100 cabs, seeing through 100 windshields, controlling 100 vehicles. His singular identity had fragmented and replicated across the entire convoy. Michael Thornton, the original physical person, ceased to exist in that Memphis parking lot. But Michael Thornton as a pattern, as a documented series of behaviors and routes, continued in the convoy. The trucks started their engines in perfect synchronization and drove out of the parking lot, merging onto the highway, resuming their eternal journey. The convoy splits and reforms constantly, following different routes, appearing behind different drivers, growing in size as it adds new replications. Sometimes it's 3 trucks, sometimes it's 100. But it's always the same basic pattern, black Peterbilts with no markings, maintaining precise formation, following selected drivers for hours or days, then surrounding them and replicating them into the convoy. Michael's physical body was never found. His truck was discovered abandoned at the Memphis truck stop, but there was no sign of Michael himself. His wife filed a missing person report. Investigators found no leads, no evidence, no explanation. But drivers occasionally report being followed by a convoy of black trucks. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2. Sometimes it's dozens. They follow for hours, matching every move, maintaining formation. Most drivers eventually lose them, or the trucks simply disappear. But a few drivers, those who have been driving for decades, who have traveled millions of miles, who have become worthy of replication, are surrounded by the convoy and never seen again. Their trucks are found abandoned, the drivers vanish, but the convoy grows larger, adding new patterns, new replications, new iterations of drivers who have been selected for eternal journey. Michael Thornton exists in the convoy now, his consciousness fragmented across countless trucks, eternally driving, never stopping, never arriving. He's aware of being replicated, of being multiple versions of himself simultaneously, of being part of something larger than individual identity. And sometimes, when the convoy surrounds a new driver, Michael's face appears in those cab windows. Older now, worn and tired but recognizable. A warning to the trapped driver of what's about to happen. A glimpse of the fate that awaits those selected for replication. The convoy continues to travel American highways, selecting drivers, documenting patterns, replicating journeys. It's been growing for decades, maybe longer. Hundreds of drivers have been absorbed into its pattern, their individual identities fragmented and multiplied across the fleet. And it's still out there, still following, still adding to its numbers. If you're a professional driver and you notice a convoy of black trucks following you, maintaining precise formation, matching your moves, multiplying in number, understand that you've been selected. The convoy has chosen you for replication. You can try to escape. Most drivers do. But if the convoy surrounds you, if you find yourself encircled by copies of your own truck driven by copies of yourself, then your journey as an individual has ended. You'll become part of the convoy, your pattern preserved and replicated forever. Traveling eternal routes, never stopping, never truly arriving anywhere. Michael Thornton's family still waits for answers. But the only answer is that Michael is still driving, will always be driving, exists eternally in motion as part of a convoy that documents and preserves the patterns of those who dedicate their lives to the road. The convoy is always growing. It may already be following you. And if you've been driving long enough, traveled far enough, become skilled and experienced enough, you may be next. Watch your mirrors. Check for black trucks maintaining formation, and if you see them, if you notice them matching your every move, try to escape while you still can. Because once the convoy surrounds you, your individual journey ends and your eternal journey as part of the replicated pattern begins. Michael learned too late that some convoys aren't just groups of trucks traveling together. Some are something else entirely. Collections of replicated patterns, preserved journeys, drivers who have been selected and copied into eternal motion. And the convoy continues, growing with each new replication, traveling forever, carrying the patterns of drivers who thought they were individuals but became instead iterations of an endless journey that never stops and never truly goes anywhere. The road is eternal. The convoy is eternal. And once you're replicated into it, you're eternal too, but no longer yourself. Just a pattern, just a copy, just another black truck maintaining formation, following forever.